The town of Elmridge, nestled between amber plains and high desert mountains, was a place where tradition ran deeper than the well water, and family names carved destinies long before children took their first steps. It was the kind of town where fathers sat on church boards and mothers curated reputations like fine china, and the Blake family reigned over it all like cattle barons of old. Savannah Blake, 24 and bred like a thoroughbred for society's elite, stood in front of her bedroom mirror, clutching the folds of her grandmother's vintage wedding dress. The corset pinched at her ribs while the delicate lace scratched the nape of her neck, but those discomforts were nothing compared to the weight pressing on her heart. She was hours away from marrying Grant Mitchell, a well-groomed heir to a banking dynasty, handsome, wealthy, respected, and yet utterly hollow. Her father, William Blake, had orchestrated this union with the precision of a cattle auction. Grant's lineage, clean reputation, and financial alignment made him perfect on paper. But no one had bothered to read Savannah's heart, because Savannah was in love with the wrong man. Jesse Carter, the son of a disgraced rancher and the town's quiet horse trainer, had stolen her heart like a thief in the night. Their love had grown in silence, beneath willow trees and in hidden stables, blooming like wildflowers in soil that society refused to tend. Jesse was everything Grant wasn't: honest, grounded, untamed. But he came from scandal. His father, once a trusted foreman on the Blake ranch, had lost everything after a false accusation of theft that William Blake never let rest. The Carters had been pariahs ever since. Savannah had promised Jesse she'd fight for them, but when her father handed her the engagement ring, a family heirloom heavy with legacy, she had faltered. Now, with violins warming up outside and wedding guests arriving in cowboy hats and designer boots, she could no longer see a way out. The air smelled of roses, polished oak, and generational pressure. And deep down, Savannah knew this wasn't her wedding. It was her family's victory parade. The ceremony was held in the estate's back garden, a field once used for rodeos now transformed into a bridal paradise. Rows of white chairs lined the manicured lawn, with wildflowers tied in bundles to each aisle end. Guests wore their best: linen suits, pearl snap shirts, wide-brimmed hats for the men, and floral prairie dresses and suede boots for the women. The air buzzed with polite chatter and subtle judgments. The Blake family stood like royalty, nodding to the mayor, the sheriff, and the town's wealthiest ranchers. At the altar, Grant smiled, lips curled like someone who always got what he wanted. When Savannah stepped onto the grass, arm in arm with her father, the crowd stood. She walked slowly, almost gliding, her gown trailing like a story she could no longer rewrite. The music swelled, but just as the minister began his welcome, a rustle at the edge of the weeping willows drew her eye. There, in the shadows, stood Jesse, hat in hand, boots dusted from the trail, eyes fixed on her like a brand to skin. He shouldn't have come, but Jesse never played by their rules. Savannah's breath hitched, caught between duty and desire. For a moment, time slowed. The minister's words drowned beneath the roar in her ears. Her eyes begged Jesse to leave, to not make this harder. But Jesse stayed. Not to stop the wedding, but to make sure she saw him. To remind her that what they had was real, no matter how deeply she buried it beneath lace and vows. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. She repeated her lines. She said, "I do." But as Grant kissed her, Savannah's soul splintered. Her lips moved, but her heart stayed with Jesse under those willow trees. That night, as the reception unfolded with whiskey toasts and two-stepping under string lights, Savannah snuck away from the crowd. She walked barefoot through the barn where Jesse had once taught her to ride. And there, carved into the wood above her favorite stall, was what Jesse had etched long ago: "Ours, until the wind forgets the prairie." Savannah touched the carving. She had made her choice, but she wasn't sure it was hers to begin with. The morning after the wedding was colder than it should have been for early spring. Mist rolled over the hills of Elmridge like a veil that refused to lift, draping the Blake estate in a heavy, silver hush. Inside the mansion's bridal suite, Savannah sat at the edge of a four-poster bed that felt more like a witness than a comfort. Her dress had been neatly folded away, her bouquet abandoned on the floor, petals already browning at the edges. Grant lay sprawled across the bed, snoring lightly, the smell of bourbon still lingering in the sheets. Savannah stared out the bay window toward the east pasture, Jesse's old riding trail. Her fingers toyed with the wedding ring, a diamond so large it felt like a cage around her hand. She hadn't slept. Not really. How could she, knowing she had traded her heart for her father's approval? Breakfast was served in the sunroom, just her, Grant, and the expectations neither of them voiced. Grant, still hungover but smug in his victory, spoke of plans, house renovations, charity galas, a honeymoon in Montana. He used the word "we" like a pronoun of power, as if marriage had made Savannah his by law and by legacy. She smiled when he looked at her, nodded when required. But inside, she was numb. She had been raised to fulfill a role, to uphold the Blake name, to smile and pose and perform. But now, after the vows, the reality was suffocating. Her mother, Eleanor Blake, entered midway through the meal, dressed immaculately in pearls and denim, her smile precise. "You did well, darling," she said, brushing a hand across Savannah's shoulder. Everything looked perfect. Savannah looked up, searching her mother's eyes for the girl she might have once been, the one who also married for legacy. But Eleanor's gaze was iron. "Perfection is our heritage," she whispered, then left. Savannah understood then. No one would rescue her, not even the women who had been through this before her. Meanwhile, across town in a modest one-story ranch house on Carter Hill, Jesse stood at the workbench in his father's old stable, his hands trembling as he sanded the edge of a custom saddle. The leather groaned under his touch, worn, imperfect, real. The way Savannah used to laugh when she rode bareback across the fields with her hair loose and free. The image wouldn't leave him. Neither would the sound of her voice saying, "I do," even though she looked like she wanted to run. Jesse's father, Ray Carter, sat nearby on an old crate, puffing on a hand-rolled cigarette. "You shouldn't have gone to that wedding," Ray muttered, his voice brittle with age and regret. "You think love changes a damn thing in Elmridge? It don't. Never has." Jesse didn't answer. He just kept sanding. "You know what happens to boys who chase Blakes?" Ray added. "They end up with nothing. Like me." But Jesse hadn't come to argue. He had come to build, to move forward. If Savannah was gone, then he would pour himself into the land, the horses, the work. He had dreams of reopening Carter Stables, restoring the tarnished legacy his family once held with pride. Yet even those dreams felt hollow today. The town still whispered behind his back, still crossed the street when he walked by, still saw him as the son of a thief, even after the truth had come out. Elmridge didn't forgive easily, and it never forgot. But Jesse didn't want their forgiveness. He wanted Savannah. That night, after mucking stalls and feeding horses, he took the long way home, walking past the estate's edge under a starless sky. He saw the glow of the Blake mansion in the distance, where Savannah now slept in another man's bed. But he also saw something else, a candle burning in her childhood bedroom window. Their old signal. 3 flickers. Then darkness. Then 2 flickers. She remembered. She still remembered. Jesse's jaw tightened. Whatever vows Savannah had made in daylight, he knew what her heart had said when no one was watching. 3 weeks into her marriage, Savannah Blake Mitchell had learned how to wear her new life like a costume stitched with privilege and resignation. She attended every dinner, smiled at every fundraiser, stood beside Grant at every press photo like a doll wound too tightly to speak. On the outside, everything was curated perfection. On the inside, she was a prisoner in her own family's legacy. The Blake-Mitchell alliance had elevated her status to near royalty in Elmridge. Ladies at the church now whispered her name with envy instead of judgment, and men tipped their hats more reverently as she passed. But Savannah would have traded it all for one honest day with Jesse. One morning where she could wake up to the sound of horses neighing and not the hollow silence of Grant's absence. Because even when her husband was physically present, his mind lived elsewhere, often in spreadsheets, phone calls, or locked meetings in the study with her father. It was during one of those meetings that Savannah overheard her first real lie. She had gone into the hallway to return a crystal decanter to the bar when she heard Grant's voice, low and hushed behind the office door. Her father's followed, sterner, colder. "You're not just in this marriage for optics, Grant." We agreed. "When the highway contract lands, the Carter property folds. We'll buy it out and push him off that land for good. Savannah doesn't need to know." She froze. The decanter nearly slipped from her hands. Her heart thundered. Carter property? Jesse's ranch? The truth cut deeper than a betrayal. It was a war plan dressed as business. That explained the pressure to marry quickly, the urgency to unite the families before Grant's real ambitions took root. They weren't just burying Savannah's love life. They were laying siege to Jesse's entire existence. She backed away from the door in silence, her mind unraveling. Her marriage wasn't just a sacrifice, it was a weapon. And she had been handed to the enemy wrapped in silk and rings. That night, while Grant hosted a cigar-tasting event with local tycoons and political aspirants, Savannah excused herself early. She traded her champagne gown for jeans and a faded flannel shirt, the one Jesse had left in the stable years ago, hidden under a loose floorboard. She tucked her hair into a ball cap and slipped out the back gate, walking through the peach orchard that separated her estate from the rest of town. The Carter ranch sat in the distance like a relic of defiance. Jesse was in the paddock, tending to a colt that had just lost its mother. His sleeves were rolled, shirt damp with sweat, boots stained with dust and effort. When he saw her, his face hardened, not out of hatred, but out of pain too long carried. "You shouldn't be here," he said, stroking the colt's mane. "You're a Mitchell now." Savannah climbed the fence and stepped into the pen, unafraid. "I heard them," she said. "My father and Grant. They're coming for your land." Jesse said nothing. He just kept brushing the colt, calm and slow, as though this were just another storm to ride through. "They think the new highway gives them the right to erase your name," she added. "But I won't let them." Jesse finally turned to face her, sweat glistening on his brow. "You don't get to save me, Savannah," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You chose him." "I chose survival," she snapped. "You think I wanted this life? You think I wanted to be a pawn in their deals?" Her voice cracked, raw. "I still love you, Jesse. I never stopped." They stood in silence, the moonlight spilling over the pasture, illuminating the ghosts between them. Jesse reached for her hand. "Then fight for something more than guilt," he said. "Fight for something real. Not behind gates and gowns, but here, with me." Savannah squeezed his hand. Her answer wasn't in words. It was in the fact that she hadn't let go. The next morning, Savannah sat in her mother's tea room, a place as cold and curated as the woman who owned it. Delicate porcelain cups clinked on matching saucers, while sunlight cut through the lace curtains like judgment. Eleanor Blake poured Earl Grey into her daughter's cup without meeting her eyes. "You look tired, dear," she remarked, her tone sterile. Savannah wanted to scream. Wanted to tell her mother everything. About Jesse, about the plan to destroy the Carters, about how her marriage was nothing but a land grab disguised in Vows. But when she opened her mouth, her courage faltered. Eleanor had always been an iceberg, and Savannah, like her, had been taught to sink emotion beneath manners. "Just restless," Savannah lied. Her mother nodded, sipping her tea as if that answer was all she'd hoped for. That's how the Blake women survived, by swallowing fire until it burned them from within. Later that day, Savannah rifled through her father's locked files in his home office while he was out at the country club. Inside, she found maps, contracts, and blueprints, including a layout for a new highway expansion project that would cut directly through Carter land. It wasn't just business. It was annihilation. They were going to seize Jesse's home under eminent domain, and her marriage was part of the political machinery to make it happen. Savannah felt her stomach twist. Her father wasn't just a manipulative man. He was a colonizer in a tailored suit. She tucked the files into her bag and fled the house. That evening, she returned to the Carter ranch and gave Jesse the documents. He read them without blinking, then quietly said, "Now I know what war looks like when it wears pearls and cufflinks." Jesse brought the documents to a lawyer in Laramie the next day, an old friend of his father's who had once been run out of Elmridge for opposing William Blake in a land dispute. "They'll use every loophole they can find," the lawyer warned. "But if Savannah's willing to testify, we might stop it." Jesse hesitated. He couldn't ask Savannah to ruin her family's name, not unless she was ready to burn the house she grew up in. But when he returned to the ranch that night, she was already there, waiting by the fence in her old riding boots. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll stand against them. For you. For us." Jesse felt the weight of her words settle over his shoulders. This wasn't just a love affair anymore. It was rebellion. Their plan took shape quietly. Jesse would fight the land grab legally, using the documents Savannah provided. Savannah would begin leaking anonymous tips to the press, stories about corruption, forced marriages, and collusion between Elmridge's elite. Together, they would expose the rotten foundation beneath the town's glittering surface. But war has a cost. When the first article hit the papers, William Blake exploded. He called Savannah into his study, demanding to know what she had done. She looked him in the eyes and said, "I learned to lie by watching you." Savannah became both pariah and prophet overnight. The Elmridge Courier ran a front-page exposé titled "The Blake Empire: Truth Beneath the Vows," and the town erupted in whispers. Church ladies who once envied her now avoided eye contact. Former allies of the Blake family began distancing themselves, afraid of the fire that was catching. But Savannah didn't waver. She walked through town with her head held high, Jesse sometimes at her side, sometimes in the shadows. The scandal had cracked the porcelain surface of Elmridge, and beneath it oozed years of buried resentment, truth, and greed. Even Eleanor Blake refused to speak to her daughter now, choosing exile over confrontation. Behind closed doors, William Blake and Grant Mitchell scrambled. With their reputations faltering, the highway deal faced delays. Investors withdrew. City officials hesitated. But William wasn't finished. He hired a private investigator to tail Savannah, hoping to catch her in a scandal of her own. What he found shocked even him. Photos of Savannah and Jesse meeting at the stables. Notes in Savannah's journal about the fake marriage. Emotional confessions. And the final dagger. Savannah was pregnant. William didn't tell her he knew, not yet. He waited. Because the next war would not be waged in courts or newspapers. It would be waged in bloodlines. When Savannah missed her cycle, she didn't panic. Not at first. But when her body confirmed what her heart already suspected, she wept alone in the barn, the only place she still felt safe. She didn't know how Jesse would react, or Grant, or the town, but she knew what she had to do. That night, she met Jesse under the same willow tree where they had first kissed. She placed his hand on her stomach. "You're going to be a father," she whispered. Jesse didn't speak for a long time. Then, finally, he smiled. "Then let's give this baby a world worth being born into." News spread quickly. The pregnancy, the affair, the truth of the sham marriage. The town lost its mind. Grant confronted her in the kitchen of the estate, shoving a glass off the counter and shouting that she had humiliated him. Savannah looked him dead in the eyes and said, "You never owned me. You just rented my silence." He raised a hand to strike her, but she didn't flinch, and he didn't follow through. Grant left that night, publicly disgraced, legally untethered. Savannah filed for annulment the next morning. Eleanor Blake fell ill. Whether from heartbreak, shame, or the sheer weight of silence, no one could say. Savannah visited her mother in the estate's sick room and found her weaker than she'd ever seen her. Eleanor gripped her daughter's hand, whispered, "Don't become me," and then turned away. Savannah took that as both blessing and curse. Meanwhile, William doubled down on his warpath. With Savannah now legally separated and pregnant by a man he despised, he launched a final legal assault on the Carter Ranch. But Jesse had prepared. With documentation, allies, and now national media attention, the court sided in his favor. The Carter Ranch was declared untouchable. The town turned, slowly, quietly, then all at once. A pastor condemned the corruption from the pulpit. A local journalist dug deeper into Blake Enterprises' ties to the mayor. Stores stopped stocking Blake-branded products. William watched as the empire he built on intimidation and image began to rot. One morning, he found the gates to his estate chained shut by protesters. Spray-painted on the iron were the words, "The vows were never yours to give." Savannah and Jesse moved into a small farmhouse at the edge of Carter Land. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs. She planted sunflowers where the barbed wire once stood. He built a crib from oak. At night, they sat on the porch, her head on his shoulder, watching the prairie breathe in the wind. She found peace in small things, like the way Jessie held her belly when she slept, or how the townspeople, once cold, now brought them pie and clothes for the baby. Elmridge, though slow to change, was finally opening its eyes. Then one morning a letter arrived. Not from William, not from Grant, but from her mother. Handwritten. Short. "You were right to leave. But be careful. He's not done." Inside the envelope was a flash drive. On it, proof of years of laundering, extortion, falsified reports. Enough to bring Blake Enterprises to its knees. Savannah held the drive in her hand and whispered, "You just gave me the keys to end this." With the flash drive in her possession, Savannah understood her next move would define not just her future, but her child's legacy. She and Jesse met with a federal investigator in Denver. The agent, cautious but intrigued, took the flash drive and promised an inquiry. Within weeks, subpoenas were issued, and Blake Enterprises became the subject of a federal investigation. William Blake was called to testify. News vans circled the estate like vultures. Savannah watched it unfold from a distance, the same way she once watched her own wedding procession, half in awe, half in sorrow. Eleanor passed away quietly, her name never cleared, but her conscience finally lightened. Savannah gave her a proper funeral, despite the tensions. She stood at the graveside and whispered, "I'll finish it for both of us." William, disgraced and alone, refused to attend. Instead, he doubled down, going live on local radio, declaring his innocence and blaming Savannah for the witch hunt against him. But the town had already chosen its truth. The curtain had been pulled back, and now there was no going back. The investigation led to multiple arrests: Grant Mitchell for bribery and racketeering, Blake Enterprises CFO for fraud, and several city officials for obstruction of justice. William was not jailed, but fined heavily and stripped of his business rights. His empire was dissolved. Savannah declined to press personal charges. "He's lost more than I ever could have taken," she told Jesse. "Let him live with the ruin." Their child, Callan Carter Blake, was born on a windy spring morning. Jesse cried first. Savannah cried after. In that moment, everything changed. Not just their world, but Elmridge itself. The town, humbled, now carried stories of redemption along with its tradition. The Carters, once shamed, were now honored. The Blakes, once revered, were now remembered as cautionary tale. And Savannah, once trapped beneath her vows, had finally found her voice. The final chapter wasn't written in a courtroom or a church. It was written on a ranch porch, in the arms of a man who never stopped loving her, and in the quiet breath of a baby born free.
Jungle.